I went on my first 200K with Kit, and that was a winter pancake, and I was hooked. I think I'm used to riding alone quite a bit. So I was a little bit nervous going into this thinking, these are people I don't know. I'm going to be stuck riding with them for 9 to 10 hours. What is this going to be like? And it really just blew my mind how interesting and welcoming and non-intimidating it was to ride with these people. And now they're some of my best friends.
Welcome to the Streets MN podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful Frog Town, St. Paul, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. Today I want to share with you some stories about Randonneuring, a long-distance bicycling format. So, if there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I have a very utilitarian relationship with cycling. I bike commute, I go to get groceries, I bike to where I'm going, and for most of my life I haven't been very interested in cycling as a sport. I've never been interested in training for a specific event and competing, but as an expression of utilitarian cycling, one thing that I have been interested in is getting longer and longer distances behind me, right? Thinking about, okay, I need to visit family in whatever town that's far away, can I make it there by bicycle? And so naturally, over the course of that journey, I have been pursuing longer and longer distances each time that I travel to places. And a few years ago, I remember I was going out to Eau Claire, and I decided to take kind of the longer scenic route down to Hastings from the Twin Cities, and then cutting a diagonal up from Prescott, Wisconsin, up to Eau Claire to take advantage of a few prominent trails along that route. And when I got to my destination and posted my recording of the ride to Strava, one of my coworkers, Tom Cook, who has always, ridden much, much longer distances than I, he commented on that ride saying, "Hey, you're going to be a randonneur someday." And I was like, "What does that mean, Tom? You're just making up words now." But I went and searched it up online and did a little research, and I was reading that Randonneuring, it's a long-distance bicycling format. 200 kilometers is the default distance, and I almost kind of checked out right then and there. But the article I was reading was talking about that these events are meant to be ridden together as a group, and everybody who finishes a ride gets equal credit. It doesn't matter what order people finish in. It doesn't matter how fast you go. And that really piqued my interest. It seemed like a really cool way to meet other people who like to ride long distances. And so I looked into it. And here in Minnesota, we have a group, the Minnesota Randonneurs, which is, a local club that's affiliated with national and international level organizations for Randonneuring. And I've participated in a few Randonneur rides over the last couple of years, and they are just starting up their spring season right now. They're having a spring conference to, prepare people for the upcoming season, to get new riders introduced to the concept, and it is on April 8th at Southdale Library, and I wanted to share some stories with you listeners about Randonneuring. So during the first half of this episode, we're going to be hearing from a few board members of the Minnesota Randonneurs who are going to talk about, the sport itself, the format, kind of high-level stuff. And then in the second half, we are going to get to chat with a couple of individual randonneurs and talk to them about some of their favorite stories. What are their favorite things about participating in Randonneuring? All right, let's hop in.
Hi, I'm Keith Moracle, and I'm glad to be here. I joined the Randonneurs in 2019 and have been pretty avid ever since. I actually joined as an excuse to train with other people that wanted to ride long distances and found out that it was so much fun that it was just good to participate anyway.
All right, Chris?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Carlson. I'm older than John, but a younger member. I started during the pandemic, riding with friends long distances, and I'm a former bike commuter back when we used to go to buildings to work. And I am currently the president of the Minnesota Randonneurs.
And Rob?
I've been doing Randonneur events for 44 years. There was about a 27-year gap in there. I had some family and kids and stuff. But I did PVP in 1979, and I came back to Randonneuring after our kids kind of got through and were off to school. I've been doing it since 2007. And around 2008 or 9, I became the RBA, or sort of the head of Minnesota Randonneurs. We moved the base for Minnesota Randonneurs, which has been going for about 25 years, up to the Twin Cities from Rochester, and it's just grown from there. And now we have somewhere around 120 members, including here on this call. And we've gone from somewhere between 5 to 6 events a year to close to 50 events this year.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the things, and Ian, you've been involved here in the last few years. I think hopefully through some manner we've been able to get your interest. And what our big focus, I think, this year is, and Keith, and Chris, and John, and the rest of our board members are all in on this, is to really reach out to the many other people in different clubs or individual rides on gravel, fat bikes, and just see how many of these people we can include in the Randonneuring tent. To this aim, we have a spring conference coming up here on the 8th of April that we'd really like to use this podcast to help get the word out to the broader masses, I guess, and see if we could encourage some of these people to come to this conference on April 8th and see what Randonneuring is all about, and hopefully develop an interest in coming out and riding with.
Yeah, it feels kind of silly to be recording an episode about long-distance cycling when we've got, one of the biggest snowstorms of the year going on right outside.
Hey, it's 90 degrees here. I don't want to hear it. I'll bet it's close to that in Tahiti, too.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people on this call who are not currently in Minnesota, but they'll be back. They'll be back before the season starts.
Yeah.
So,
get your fat bikes out.
Okay, so Randonneuring itself. So let's talk about the history of it a little bit. Clearly, it's a very French origin.
Randonneuring is French for a ride in the country, a walk in the country. Initially, there was this sort of a professional interest. Bike racing was just getting going then, and some of the organizers of these events thought there might be a really good way to drive interest in the sport and try to get more people involved. It might be a good avenue to explore. Henri de Grange decided that the ultimate event would be to ride from Paris out to the west coast, Brest and back, which was about 1,200 kilometers. And he felt that would bring out the best of the best in the pros and drive a lot of interest from his subscribers. And he was right. He sponsored PVP. He had about 500 people show up. About 400 of them actually started. Out of that, about 10 or 12 of them were real racers. Back then, racing was a different thing. The top 5 or 6 riders took off and rode. They didn't ride on their own. Every time they got to a small town, there'd be another team of riders sitting there waiting to pace them to the next town. So the top 5 or 6 riders, they got all the bennies. They just sat in there. They got their food handed to them. They got half a dozen strong guys who would haul them to the next checkpoint, and then off they go. Behind that, though, was 200 or 300 riders who weren't sponsored, weren't getting anything out of it, were just riding for free, and they were called allure libre, free riders that were riding along just for the experience of that. About the early 1920s, pros decided that it was just too much. There's too many other shorter races where the riders could make more money on. They just decided that they were going to stop doing this 1,200K monster ride every 10 years. At that time, the Allure Libre riders got together and formed an ACP, who has been the driving force for Randonneuring since then. There were different events put on, shorter events. They developed the idea of a 200K, a 300K, a 400K, and a 600K as being a qualifier to ride PVP, so riders were ready to do the actual ride. And finally, in 1979, there was an organized effort from the U.S. that put together a program that AGP would accept that allowed riders to train in the U.S. and come to Paris in 1979 and ride the PVP event then. There was 32 riders that came over. I was one of those 32. And it was,
wow.
It was an amazing event. There was 1,700 riders, and they all started in one wave back then. And out of the 32 riders, I think 31 of us didn't have the vaguest idea what we were getting into. It was an incredible event for me. It was a transformational event to see how far we could actually go. None of us had ridden more than 600K at a time, but most of the Americans got through that. From there, on the American side, about 25 years ago, that would be 1995 or so, the various independent groups around the U.S. got together and formed RUSA, Randonneuring USA, which was sort of the collecting place for all the various randonneur groups in the U.S. to manage their results, to manage their certifications, and put an American spin on this sort of a sport. Now, RUSA is coming up on their 25th or 30th anniversary. There's over 50 RBA or randonneuring groups around the country that are going to be sending somewhere around 500 riders to PVP coming up this year. PVP itself, Paris itself, has grown from 1,700 odd riders back in 1979 to 8,000 riders from all over the world that are coming to this event later this summer. So randonneuring has come a long way since 1891. RUSA as an organization has come a long way in the last 25 to 30 years. Minnesota Randonneurs started 25 years ago, just about the time RUSA was getting started. And as I was saying earlier, they were a small group in Rochester. We moved to the Twin Cities about 13, 14 years ago. We're one of the larger groups within RUSA with 100 and some odd members. We put on about 50 events a year. We're continuing to grow, and we're really looking to try to find more people that would be interested in joining our sport.
Talking about PVP as kind of the flagship, the big event that everybody thinks about every 4 years, was it?
Yes.
I can tell you that as a newly joining the Randonneur group here in Minnesota, 1,200 kilometers is not what you're going to be signing up for right out the bat.
Yeah.
It's much more common are the 200K, 100K, 300K events. Let's talk about that format a little bit. Within Randonneuring, you do those events kind of with an eye towards qualifying for things like PVP, or there are awards that you can get for doing a certain number of rides, a certain distance, over a course of time. But within each event, there's no timed, it's not about who finishes first. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the distinction there and kind of what flavor of riding that gives us.
Every randonneuring ride has, I think, two main goals. One is to finish, and that's the primary goal. It's a bunch of people who help each other out. And, if somebody has a flat tire, people will help out as best they can. There's no competition in the sense of a race. And that's probably one of the biggest draws for me and for many people, is that camaraderie and figuring it out. Oh, we took a wrong turn. Wait, how do we get back? The second thing is that every ride is a part of something larger. There's this qualification. If you finish a 200, you might be set for a 300. And then you can get a series, which is all of them in one season. And that does focus, participation, and persistence. And so I think it's a real neat part of the ethos of the club is to ride for riding and to really enjoy it. And that's something that being in Minnesota, we have such a great bike community. I was a bike commuter for years, and there's a real culture around it of just like a blue collar, hey, let's get it done. And the Randonneuring Club has it, and it attracts just an amazing group of people. And I think it's helped with that dual focus. It's let's finish this ride. And then, how does that help us for?
Ian, you had said, there's a number of different rides in there. And Chris, you had talked about the series. And I think there's two parts to it. There's the camaraderie, which you explained very well. And yet doing a 200K, which is 124 miles, is actually challenging in and of itself. So the ride itself can be challenging. And the core rides that the Minnesota Randonneurs provide are the 200, the 300K, the 400, and the 600. Well, first time you get on your bike, you aren't going to go 378, and it might even seem kind of ridiculous to even think about that. But once you get that first 200 down, then obviously going to a 300 is a logical next step. The nice thing that we have, though, as randonneurs, especially the Minnesota Randonneurs, that really have a variety of different types of rides available, is that we have the Roulette series, which is shorter and starts off at 100K and has 125K, 150, and works its way up to 200. So that could be a challenge for someone just starting off that's going to be very fulfilling. And then clearly, so there's a distance challenge all the way along, no matter how strong of a rider or if you're just starting off or if you've been riding your whole life. I mean, there's still a challenge ahead of you while you're doing that. with other people and having a lot of fun doing it.
And I did just remember that, like, one of the nice things about a lot of these events is that there will be multiple distance options available at the start. Quite often we'll be starting at one spot, you know, in like Apple Valley, for example, and there will be a 200K loop option. There will be a 300K loop option. I have in the past, like, shown up, realized that nobody else was going to be doing the distance that I wanted to do, and just decided, oh, I'll up to the next level and see if I can do a 300K. That's my first 300K of my life, but like, let's see if I can do it. And it went well.
You've got the right spirit there, Ian.
I just wanted to add the barrier to entry, or the shortest distance, is 100K, 62 miles, which I think could be more palatable to, you know, a recreational cyclist. You're like, okay, 62 might be kind of a long day, but if you can show up and you can handle 62, you know, that's the starting point, and who knows where you'll be from there. When I first started, I showed up for 100K and it about killed me. And I was like, okay, I've hit my limit. But then, you know, once you do the 100, then you figure out your system a little bit better, your fitness, and you come back. Okay, now I can do 150 or 200. And they're nice springboard amounts that are standardized. So it's an alluring program to have all these different distances.
Just by showing up, doing those distances, and then also like meeting other people who are riding these long distances, I found that to be a very good way to hone my craft, learn from other people who are doing this on a consistent basis. And everybody loves swapping tips and tricks and, you know, talking about what kinds of equipment we like to use and, you know, how often do you take rest stops, et cetera, et cetera. Although rest stops are, in terms of randonneuring, those are usually built into the rides, which is also a nice feature. All of that planning, not having to do that myself, finding the route and everything. I happened to join during the pandemic, which was kind of a weird time because we were, instead of encouraged to ride all together, which is kind of the traditional thing that you do in randonneuring, we were like, okay, pick your like little group of like one or two other people and just stick with them for the day. But since then, you know, later on have had opportunities to hang out with a larger group of people during randonneuring events. We mentioned that we have 50 plus events planned this year. What's coming down the pipeline? What do we got?
50 events is a lot. So there's something hopefully for everyone. You know, we've got riders who are using Minnesota Randonneurs as their training for PBP, Paris-Brest-Paris. Like we said, that 1200K is like the kind of the goal for these people. So they'll build up to that, riding incremental distances that get longer and longer. But I think the bread and butter is the 200K. Got a ton of those. We have people who will ride a 200K at least once every month of the year. And of course, there's a RUSA award for that. It can get 12 200K rides in a row. And riding in the winter, that winter program, I mean, that's tough stuff. But of course, there are people out there who are interested in that. Like we mentioned, we got the Rouleur, all this French. We got the Rouleur program that's a little bit shorter, 100K, 125K, 150K, and a 200K ride. If you complete all those, you know, you get an award for that. We got a variety of gravel rides. Obviously, gravel has a different appeal from road riding. So different people might show up for those rides. A little bit hillier, a little more scenic. I think we've got 100 and a 200K gravel.
And I believe that that's relatively unique in the randonneuring world, right? Like not a whole lot of other clubs throughout the country are emphasizing gravel as much as Minnesota Randonneurs are.
Well, I know in the greater world, of course, gravel is ascending and is popular here in the Midwest and in America too. But Rob, are other clubs doing as much gravel as we are?
There's some. I think we are blessed with a lot of gravel opportunities out there. And as you all know, if you go out and look at the different gravel groups that are putting on events, you do a gravel event every week of the year out here. We're starting to get more and more events, adding more events to our calendar with the Randonneuring spin. You know, you go out there, do the ride with your friends. It's not a race. You don't have to be done in under 4 hours or whatever. Just get out and enjoy the ride. And the routes are routes that we've checked over and are approved by our national body. So we do put an eye towards safety. And as John said, we try to find some scenic routes. I think gravel is something we've been dabbling in and growing a little more every year. And I think this year we've added a number of gravel events, and we're hoping to entice more people to ride along with us.
I know it was mentioned before, but I want to mention it again. April 8th, we are having a huge in-person kickoff. I know that's the wrong word to use, but I just can't think of another word because it's for football, right? But we're opening the season with a conference, and we're super excited to do this. Rob used to do it in the past, and we're going to get together and talk about safety and mechanic things and routes and contests. And so it should be a lot of fun and a great way to reconnect for existing members, but also new members.
Yeah, let's hear all the details on that. Like when and where is it?
April 8th, it's at the Southdale Library. We have one of the big conference rooms there. If you go to our website, which is www.mnrando.org, you'll see a link to get to register. Registration is free. I think we're limited to about 50 people, which will fill up pretty quick. Lunch is provided, as well as some snacks along the way. We'll meet at 9 in the morning. We'll finish at noon. And if the weather's half decent, we may go out for a ride after.
So bring your bike with you.
Definitely. Assuming you get dug out after this week's snowmageddon.
Did anybody have any other ideas, any other things that came to mind while we were chatting?
One thing that I'll add is the kind of interesting counterbalance to the everyday nature of biking that I think is at the heart of Randonneuring. Just get out and ride, and anyone can do it. It's amazing what you can do with a group of people, just like you said, like, oh, I signed up for the 200. I guess I'm going to do 300. Wow, I did it. That's really at the heart. At the same time, the more you ride, the more you get to meet interesting people. And there are some incredible people that have done incredible things, biking across the country, setting world records, PBP. So it's really something else if you have a love of biking, or even if you have a love of interesting people. I think it continues to really give back every time I go out for a ride, and just wanted to pepper that in. We're not racers, and we're not all these other little niches. And so we are quite open, but we have some really high flyers that I think is kind of fun to let everyone know about as well. So come out and meet us all in April 8th.
Yeah, I think I joined the Minnesota Randonneurs and watched the North Star bike race right around the same time a couple of years ago, and found out that Keith had recently set a world record for like biking through every state in the U.S. in the shortest amount of time. And so I was a little starstruck seeing him at the start of the North Star bike race. But like, as it turns out, he's just a guy. He's a cool guy. He's fun to hang out with. Like,
yeah, I mean, if you want to spend 15, 20, 30 hours with somebody, you go on a ride with them. You get to know him pretty well. He's amazing, and so is the rest of the group. But that's the kind of little surprises and treasures that you come across. It's something else.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning, too, is I started as a way to start training for some of those ultra-distance races. And it took me my very first ride, which happened to be a November 200, to realize that the fun was with the riding with the other folks that were going along at the same time. So it's definitely well worth it just to meet the people and talk with the other riders. And to your point, Chris, a moment ago, it's really cool in that if you're thinking a 200K is a bit of a stretch, once you do one with a bunch of people that do them relatively frequently, you gain so much knowledge on how to ride even better, even just by osmosis, even if you aren't even trying. So that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. And Keith, what's that catchphrase that you came up with? I see it in your email signature like every time that you chat with me.
Ride far with friends. Absolutely. I mean, that's what Randonneuring is. It's riding far with friends.
Yep. By joining, it's a yearly membership, but most of the events are free once you are a member. Some of the longer distance ones that require an overnight with a hotel stay, like that's going to be some added cost. But one of the nice things that you get with a membership is a quarterly magazine. And I've found that, especially during the winter months when I wasn't participating in the winter season, getting that magazine and just seeing stories from people from across the country, kinds of adventures that they would get up to at Randonneuring events, and just keeping that inspiration alive when I'm stuck inside, and keeping to things like cross-country skiing instead of biking long distances.
Very inspiring to see what all sorts of different people are doing on their bikes all over the world. It's great.
Mm-hmm. And I've started planning, as I think about bike trips, visiting other parts of the country, knowing that there are other Randonneuring organizations throughout the country that I can check out and see what they're up to where I'm visiting. I think that's a really positive aspect as well.
There's about 50 Randonneuring groups around the U.S. If you do become a randonneur, you have access to the schedules of each of those clubs. You can go and join their rides anytime you want. There's actually another 50 or 60 clubs around the world. So if you're a bit of a traveler, you could get out. I know Keith's traveled to Australia and done some events, or Europe, or different parts of the world. It is a worldwide sport. Once you join in, you have access to what these other groups are doing. And if you happen to be heading that way, there's a good opportunity for you to get out and meet some other randonneurs in another country.
I do quite a bit of traveling periodically for work, and I've taken advantage of exactly what Rob is saying, but there's also something that I think is worth mentioning. Our permanent program is a fantastic way for you to just go find a route and complete it on your own or with people. And it, quote unquote, counts towards any number of qualifications. And I've done permanents and rides in many other states, and it's a fantastic way to see the country. And in fact, it's a fantastic way to see Minnesota. I've been seeing little towns that I've lived here my whole adult life and seen more of Minnesota on my bike than I've ever seen before. So
just this week, one of the RUSA technology guys has just come out with a permanent finder where you can go in and pick where you are, and it will tell you all of the permanents that are within 25, 50, 100 miles of you, or where you happen to be at that particular time, and you can sign up and ride them. Permanents are a little different than the brevets, like the regularly scheduled events. And at a permanent route, you can start wherever on the route that you want and ride the route. You got to cover the miles and end up back at the same place. But it gives you a lot of flexibility. It's nice knowing that this is a route that someone has scouted out. It's safe. It's been approved by RUSA. It, as Chris says, it does get you credit even for some award type program. But even better, if you're in a new part of the country, you can say, okay, what's going on in this part of the world? Here's a route that's just 20 miles away. I can go ride that this way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Good tools to know about for finding stuff like that. Yeah. All right, here we are talking to Kate Ankofsky, who has been involved in the Randonneuring world for, I don't know, how many years? Kate, introduce yourself.
That's a great question. I think it's been maybe 4 years now. Let's go with 4.
All right.
That sounds good.
And you were one of the board members for a while, right?
I was and I am.
Okay.
So the board we've been an official organization for 3 years now, and then we just had elections, and so I'll be on the board for another 3.
Very nice. So 4 years ago, thinking back, to back then, like what brought you to Randonneuring? Where were you at in your relationship with cycling, and how did that go?
Yeah. So I'd say it's unique, but I feel like we all have very interesting and unique introductions to long distance cycling and Randonneuring. I got into the sport in general because I saw an Alail Wilcox REI video about the Trans Am. And at that point I was commuting 3 miles to downtown and had not biked a lot as a child. So this was all very, very new. But something about that video kind of hooked me, and I knew I wanted to do Trans Am.
Because what's the difference between 3 miles to work every day and biking across the country?
Right. But what's crazy is how many people, even locally here in Minneapolis, have done Trans Am, have done other really long distance races or adventures. And so at the time, somebody connected me with Kit Oslin, who was part of the Randonneurs, and she was pointing out, how great this is for training. It really makes 126 miles seem like manageable and fun and doable, and was a great way to kind of say, okay, I think I can do this, along with a ton of motivating people to learn from. And so I went on my first 200K with Kit, and that was a winter pancake ride. It was kind of it was like the day before I was leaving for Michigan for Christmas. So it was however many years ago that was. And I was hooked. I think I'm used to riding alone quite a bit. Just that's my nature. And also it can be hard to find people who want to ride for 9 hours, in a shot. But so I was a little bit nervous going into this, thinking, these are people I don't know. I'm going to be stuck riding with them for 9 to 10 hours. What is this going to be like? And it really just blew my mind how interesting and welcoming and non-intimidating it was to ride with these people. And now they're some of my best friends. So it was really eye-opening, and has kind of changed everything, and made training for Trans Am much easier than it would have been to do alone.
Right. Yeah. You've done a lot of crazy things on bikes. Like we were just chatting about, your weekend of winter camping on a fat bike way up north. You've done the Trans Am. We've done North Star Bike Race, Trans Minnesota together. Like,
Yeah.
We've had Randonneuring rides where like the snow wasn't all melted, and we had to like hike across a giant snow berm
Yes.
on a gravel road out in the middle of nowhere near Cannon Falls, like that. What's your like favorite wild story?
Well, I don't know how wild it is, but I think I'll say I don't have a traditional, and again, who does maybe have a traditional Randonneuring path, but I think traditionally there was kind of this more rigid, you do a 200K, you do a 300K, you do a 400K type of situation, and your goal is to do Paris, which is kind of the pinnacle Randonneuring experience. But again, I kind of came into this just with Trans Am in mind, and so 4 years ago, as we were preparing for that year's Paris, down in Iowa, there was a brevet week where you could get in your qualifying rides for Paris. It was exciting for me because my goal was to try to do 6 300Ks, again, just preparing for Trans Am. It was not to earn any kind of points or credentials. It was really just, can I do day after day, big miles? It encapsulated a lot of my learning for long distance cycling, and I had food poisoning the night before, and I was also trying to camp as part of it was not great. So I was at a dry campsite a mile down the road from the hotel where everybody else was, and got really bad food poisoning from a chicken bacon ranch Subway, and had to throw clothes away in the dumpster. It was so bad. But I did my first 300K the next day, and then storms came, and the really interesting thing, I know some people just hate the idea of doing the same course period and same course day after day, but for me, to do the same, I ended up doing that loop, I think 3 or 4 times. And then because of the storms, everybody else had left. So I ended up just going home. But just how the terrain changes. Part of the route was on the Root River Trail, and it flooded. And that led to some logistical issues. I was like, I think I can get across the trail, and I'm up to my hips in water. But I came away just feeling so accomplished, and that was something that you could go and do it on your own, or like organize on your own. And I was riding alone for those last 2 days, but I would never have put that route together myself, and to have somebody to call when things got bad, to know that there might be people behind you or ahead of you is hugely uplifting. And it was a great experience. And I think, I don't know, in my mind, the Randonneuring kind of provides a structure, it provides the courses, it provides the resources, and then you can kind of make it your own adventure from there. There's such a social aspect to it, and there are breaks, and like, I don't know, to me it makes these really intimidating rides more bite-sized, more approachable, more accessible, because I think a lot of people would hear what you just said, I showed up for a 200K and ended up doing a 300K, and it would blow their minds, and it should blow their minds because that's really impressive. But I think when you realize the tone with which these rides are done, I think it's so much about camaraderie. It's so much about really enjoying the experience. We're not out there just pushing as hard as we can. It's very social. It's very fun. And you feel really good at the end of the day.
Yeah. And and it is a good structure, like you said, like it's a good structure within which you can kind of incrementally push yourself farther and farther.
Yes.
I feel like if you're not somebody who is interested in like, oh, I've ridden, X amount of kilometers at a time, like I wonder if I can do the next level. Like, if you don't have that mindset, then randonneuring probably isn't the kind of thing that's going to appeal to you in the first place. But it is it's a venue that really lends itself well to that, because like many of the routes that we have are like, well, it's one starting point, and you can either choose, there's a couple of loops that you can choose of varying different lengths. I think there are a lot of people who like, show up for like the 100Ks, the 125Ks, and that's what they're interested in. And that's cool,
And yes, and we're trying to, that's kind of a big push, is trying to expand those, because I think, I get asked a lot, even just within the board of how can we get more women to join. And part of that question is always just like, I don't want to be I'm not the speaker of all,
right.
all the women of endurance cycling. But at the same time, it's like, oh, because a lot of people my age are raising kids or are, have obligations where they can't spend an entire weekend day or entire weekend regularly once a month devoted to a hobby. And so I think having these shorter rides just makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. We're trying to do more gravel. We're trying to, just really expand it, because I think, another huge benefit of the club is just seeing more of the state, seeing more of the region. And I know myself, I live 2 blocks off of the Greenway, and when after training for Trans Am, it's like I never want to be on the Greenway. I'm so sick of the same exact routes, and so for me that's a huge draw, is just getting to see different parts of the state. And yes, if you can go out for an afternoon and or a morning and do 100K and see new things and meet new people, I foresee that that's going to end up being a more popular aspect of our sport than trying to think up new 1200K routes that are going to get fewer people.
Right. Yeah. I was astounded when I went to the City Slickers like 100K that like started at and ended like right there at Angry Catfish.
Yep.
And like oh my gosh, there were so many people there.
Well, and even though I have a car, I don't like driving to rides necessarily. And so
right.
I think trying to have more routes that people can ride to is also a big priority.
Yeah. And there's, there are still really great opportunities for that, when you're riding 200K, like you can get out really far and, and come back and, like the leaks and laves. Nope. Lakes and leaves. That's a really good route that like starts and ends right at the chain of lakes.
Yes.
And then does all of the Minnetonka area in like a cool cloverleaf pattern.
Yep.
I really enjoyed that ride a lot.
I feel like you go through Orono, or I see the Orono sign like 20 times on the
right.
No, but it's gorgeous. And I think you get to see different parts of the state. You're further out. And the stakes are so much lower, right? I mean, I think if something happens to you, if something happens to your bike, you're going to have a lot of people around to help you. And at the same time, you're definitely encouraged to show up, to know how to take care of yourself and your bike. But I think it's a great way to do it with low stakes, knowing that no one's going to be stuck out there. If any aspect of randonneuring sounds interesting to someone and you're intimidated by it, let's talk. Because I think this isn't a club where, you're expected to show up every week or you're expected to show up at all. I mean, it's really what you have time for, what you have the desire for. But but there's so much resources in terms of the routes and the experience and the gear recommendations. And that, to me, it's like, even if you just come out for a couple rides a year, it's worth it just to be part of this community.
Yeah. Like I think that's a really important thing to emphasize, is like there's so many different little things that you can focus on in Randonneuring, and you do not have to do the ones that you are not interested in. Absolutely.
You'll join a ride and feel like you found your people. I think that's what I found, at least, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah. And I recently found out about that there's somebody who's like putting together an online tool for just like finding like permanents.
Okay.
Throughout the country. And that's got me very interested in like, oh, like while I'm traveling, I can just like look up like what kinds of routes have been put together in different areas. And
that's true. And yeah, I mean, I think, I was just the last half hour just been focusing on our state. That's 100% true. I mean, there are clubs around the world, and Keith Moracle, who also trained for Trans Am, he did part of his training in Australia with a bunch of clubs, or at least one club down there. And it's this kind of built-in network throughout the world where, meet your people and get training in and see new places. And it's
it's a wonderful thing. It
is.
Like, it's like, it's a window into this world that's like, now you've got people everywhere that you can just like, you can meet, and you know that you're going to have something in common with them. You're going to have something to talk about. Right.
And I think if long distance is your thing, like we were saying, it can be really tough to find people to train with or to spend that time with, just because the obligations are so, you're just spending so much time on the bike. And so if you can spend some of that with other people who have similar goals, I think that can be a huge resource right there.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a wonderful thing to end on. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next up, we're going to chat with Justin Tan.
Hey everyone, my name is Justin Tan. I am based in St. Louis Park. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, and then I came up to Minnesota for college, and then stuck around after I graduated, and have always had a love for cycling. I feel like basically earliest memory was when my dad and I were in Naperville along with my mom. My dad took me on a little trip from the house to a nearby grocery store. At the time, the chain was called Dominic's. And I don't recall how many miles it was, but I know it was in the summertime and it was a pretty hot day. So we ended up getting some popsicles once we got to the grocery store. And so it was a very fun day. It stood out because it was a lot of fun. And at the same time, looking back, it was also one of my earliest type 2 fun events.
It's funny. The type 1, type 2 scale came up, during yesterday's conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think type 2 for sure attracts a certain variety of people. And so having moved up to Minnesota from Illinois, I've grown to love the Twin Cities a lot, especially since I grew up in a suburb, Naperville. And so that's kind of what I was used to growing up, but then coming here for school and then eventually being able to explore. You can't really compare Minneapolis to Chicago is what I tell people. They're very different cities, obviously Midwest people, but a lot of transplants. And I feel like just that smaller feel for me here in Minneapolis and St. Paul is something that I like a lot. And one of the earliest introductions I've had to the Minneapolis cycling scene was back in freshman year of college at the U. I took a freshman seminar called My Other Car is a Bicycle. And it was led by a chemistry professor, Lee Penn, at the time. And then one of the great things that Lee did was every Monday, it would just be Lee and a bunch of freshmen just riding their bikes around campus and the city. And to this day, I still ride a number of those routes that we did. So picture just the kind of impact that that seminar had on me for the rest of my life. After I graduated from the U, I still stuck around the cycling scene, mainly to commute to work from uptown to downtown. So it wasn't really that long of a commute, to be honest, but I still tried to stay active by going for regular routes. Back then, I used to do alley cats with some friends around the city, and those were super fun. I definitely miss those, and hopefully can still get back into them sometime. And then I do recall 2015 is kind of when I dipped my toes into the gravel scene. So back then, I still had my hospital foam green Surly Crosscheck. So it was a heavy steel machine, still had the cantilever brakes, but ultimately made a bunch of modifications to it to suit my needs. And getting that through my first ever gravel race, I believe it was the Filthy 50, was such an accomplishment.
Nice.
And so I remember distinctly after I finished the race, hung out a little bit, decided I loved gravel racing, long distance riding, kind of a mix of both. And I think that's kind of where I discovered the Randonneurs. I believe, I don't exactly recall the very first interaction, but if I know myself well enough, I feel like I must have Googled something along the lines of long distance bike riding in Minneapolis, and then must have stumbled upon a few rides over time. So coming up on, I'd say, a couple of years of just distance riding, one of the great things I've loved about joining the MN Randos over time was just being introduced to more of the entire area. I would say not necessarily the state. I haven't ridden throughout the state yet, but being able to explore different parts of the state. For example, from Minneapolis, riding out to Stillwater, riding out to Red Wing, riding up north around Duluth, all of that I feel like I potentially would be able to do without the MN Randos. But if I'm honest, I feel like that really opened my eyes to distance riding, and I think a lot of great things come with that. It depends on your comfort level. I think you kind of have to slowly build up to riding some of these day-long, multi-day rides. But one of the great things that I feel like the MN Rando group did for me was help me ease into that whole riding scene, whether it was helping me answer my questions or at least giving me pointers and tips on riding, in the dark, or riding along long stretches of road with either lots of traffic or just not a lot of easily accessible riding room. So I'd say over time, it gave me a lot of confidence in my riding too. And so one of Robin Williams' quotes that he mentioned was that his favorite thing to do is to ride a bike, and he rides bikes. For him, it's mobile meditation. And I feel like the days that we spend out on the bikes, even if we're in groups of 4 or 5 people, or sometimes you find a riding buddy, or even if you're by yourself, which I've definitely had many times where I've been way out in the countryside riding just by myself, which is, I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. Those are the days where as soon as the rides are over, I kind of think back to just the number of hours I spent on the bike, being able to meditate and kind of think through different things. And I feel like there's different ways people can do that for themselves off the bike, but at the same time, those are the times that I look forward to, actually, where I just kind of get that alone time. So to me, it's kind of sacred. I feel like some people have time to themselves in the morning that they consider sacred for themselves. For me, it's being on that bike. And I think that MN Rando's rides gives me a lot of good opportunities to be able to do that on a weekend.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that I think a lot of people get out of being in the Randonneuring community is like being able to chat with other people about techniques and equipment, and just build getting better at this thing that we want to be able to do, and everybody wants to share equipment, advice and everything. I hear that you ride on a single speed.
I do, yeah, the fixed gear. And
please tell me about that, because that sounds bonkers. Yeah. That's been a very interesting journey. And the funny thing too is I'm so used to it that it kind of surprises me when people bring it up. But I love kind of talking about
how I got introduced to it and how I got to where I am today, riding fixed gear bikes on 100+ mile rides. My first fixed gear bike was actually back in college, a Kilo TT, and was able to ride it throughout the winter and realized I loved the simplicity and the lack of maintenance and how easily you could beat that thing up throughout the year without having to work on it a lot. So suffice it to say, I got used to riding that fixed gear bike throughout the years from like 2011, I think, onwards. Ultimately fell in love with just being able to get around the city and riding a fixed gear bike. I remember how many times I'd be called a hipster by my friends, even though I felt like I wasn't the closest to the definition of a hipster, although I'd say I would drink, PBR on occasion, but I did bring that bike over. I think one of the earliest long distance rides I ever did with a fixed gear was 2017. I signed up for the Seattle to Portland ride, STP, about 200 miles. And being able to ride the fixed gear for that long of a distance over so many miles, so many hours, I think, really gave me a whole new perspective on riding that single speed, basically giving me that confidence to know how steep of a hill I can climb. Nowadays I've climbed Ramsey Hill a few times on the fixed gear, and nowadays when I tell people or I go for rides with people who are comfortable riding that hill, I'm like, we got to make an attempt at that hill, especially if I'm riding the fixed gear. So trying to show off a little bit, but mainly just trying to get the legs going. So it is strange to think about when I look at it from another perspective, but I love the challenge of being able to just that connected feeling of riding with your bike and being able to use your legs to kind of scrub your speed a little bit. The biggest weaknesses for me, those of the listeners who've ridden with me when I've brought the fixed gear out, is just that if it's a windy day and I don't have gears to shift, it becomes a challenge, especially on the headwinds, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the times when A, I made a mistake and I should have used a different bike, and B, it's just probably not the smartest idea trying to ride a fixed gear into a 13-mile-an-hour headwind.
So other than the fact that it's a fixed gear bike, is it, is it a pretty like touring bike setup? Like, does it, is it drop bars, ergonomic, geometry, etc.?
It's a traditional, I'd say traditional steel fixed gear. The way I have mine set up right now are all flat bars. And mainly the goal for these kinds of rides when I bring the fixed gear out is just minimizing weight. So usually they're only good for, I'd say, rides of no more than like 200K in the times that I've ridden it. I'm certainly willing to test more miles on them, but for the most part, can only carry so much food and water. Those are also the days where I'm probably carrying most of my water on my back.
Oh, sure.
Instead of on the bike and things like that. I'm hoping, at least in this upcoming Minnesota Randonneuring season, I can try and help out with either leading more rides or riding with some newer riders who maybe aren't as familiar with the Randonneuring groups yet, but are considering riding and wanting to dabble, and hopefully help them explore a little bit more of this gateway drug.
Yeah. I mean, when you push your body and your mind, to those places, like that's when you really find out who you are, and like how you are going to react to, there's like being aware of how tired you are and like when you need to stop is like one thing, but also like, if something goes wrong, right? If you have a mechanical out in the middle of the road, in the middle of nowhere, like how you react to that situation is like, oh yeah. You can either learn some very good things about yourself or some very bad things about yourself.
Yep. The one mechanical I ever had during a race that unfortunately I could not have fixed, but I guess I could have been more prepared for, was my derailleur hanger got ripped off during the Iowa Wind and Rock race in 2021. And it's a race that takes place in April in Iowa. the elevation I think is more than 20,000 feet of climbing, 340 miles, I believe. And so that year, 2021, I had tried to do as much preparation for that race as I could, having failed a prior attempt. And so there was a stretch of I believe it was like a B road. So it was definitely unmaintained. It was also super muddy that I was somehow able to pedal through while everyone else was walking their bikes. And I definitely got way too cocky trying to ride that thing. So as you can imagine, my tires were getting gunked up. If you've ever been in those situations where your adrenaline is going and your wheels are caked in mud, and you find yourself, getting slower and slower, yet you're still able to continue pushing forward. And then next thing I know, I'm out of the muddy road and back onto gravel, and I'm riding along. Mud is getting flung everywhere. And then as I'm climbing a slight hill, thinking that I'm finally out of trouble, my derailleur hanger snaps. And I don't think I made it more than like 30 miles into that 340-mile race. So there was a certain point during that moment where I was like, okay, well, this sucks. I spent so much time and energy trying to train for this race, and effectively didn't even get through like 10% of it.
Well, you know what the lesson is, obviously. You should have brought your fixed gear.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, goodness. What was I thinking? 2 lessons. 1, I should have brought that. 2, that day, that race, there's a trick where you can get one of those wooden paint sticks from like Home Depot or whatever. You bring that with you on a bike, and if you know it's going to be muddy out that day, you just whip that paint stick out and you just like start shedding that mud off your wheels. And I didn't bring it. I distinctly remember as soon as my derailleur hanger snapped off, I like pulled over to the side, inspected the damage, and basically told myself like my race was done, because I didn't have like a spare derailleur hanger and things like that. And it was just a really interesting time. I was just like, sitting there on the side of the road. I remember there were like some hay bales in a field that I just kind of rolled up to and sat against, and just like, I felt like I almost wanted to cry. I don't think I cried, but it was just a very interesting moment. So there's certain times where even though like things like that may happen, one of the things I do appreciate though about being able to try all these different rides and races though is just enjoying, I guess, the moment, the people. And so that day too, I felt like I was grateful for being able to ride that day. And at least the sunrise is really beautiful that day.
And dear listener, I hope that wherever you are, the sunrise is very beautiful for you as well. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Streets MN podcast. This show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, non-commercial, non-derivative license. So feel free to republish the episode as long as you're not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was hosted by me, Ian R. Buck, and edited by myself and Tim Marino. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets MN podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Until next time, take care.